Hi boys and girls, so you had asked me earlier to include Oscar in my YouTube videos. Oscar is my cat, if you don't know, and we've discussed how he doesn't really like me. Is that so? Is that so? No. Okay. Normally, he attacks me, but he's just trying to be polite for the camera, I bet. Oh. And he took my spot, my reading spot. Do you mind getting up? Okay. I guess not. He is kind of cute. When he's like this, he's cute. Maybe I'll have to have him on camera for you all the time and it'll be nice. So we are going to continue reading Mr. Terupt. And I will find another spot to go because someone stole mine. However, let's just recap a little bit on what's going on. In Zoom today, we talked about how Mr. Terupt seems to be having some health issues again. Oh boy, a dog. Every time he gets up, he starts to lose his balance and become really dizzy. And that's an effect of a coma. So he was in a coma in the last book because of the snowball, we all know that. Another big thing that's happened is a school, the middle school. So this school they go to right now runs from probably kindergarten to 6th grade. But once you hit 7th grade, you move schools. And that school is going to come and visit Mr. Terupt's class a couple times a year. So we are going to be reading about that in this chapter and how they react. Also, we know that Lexi is going through some changes. She's trying to fit in with high school students, and they're a bad influence. So let's continue and figure out what the deal is. Okay, I'm just going to go over here. He can join us. I like this. All right, Peter. I remember my brother telling me a long time ago that kids from Woods View School always think they're better than us. That was why I wasn't really excited for this day. None of us were, except Lexi. One look at her and I knew she was looking forward to it. One look at her and I forgot about my nervousness. She had definitely put time into getting ready. Her new purple sweater was something. She looked amazing. That's what Peter said about Lexi, everyone. You can pop your eyes back in your head, Peter, Jessica said. Now I was mad. What was I doing gawking at Lexi? And how could I get caught? Lexi was my rival. She was a girl who farted, and there was no way I could like a girl who did that. That's way too gross. Says Peter. Luke. I'm sorry to say, but I hypothesized disaster for this exchange program. It was a lot like chemistry. If you take two chemicals and mix them together, what happens? Well, my hypothesis was tested and confirmed at our first exchange day. The result was a violent reaction. The data was conclusive. This exchange thing was a bad idea. Welcome, Mr. Terupt said as our visitors arrived. Please come in and sit down wherever you see an empty seat. He was standing at the front of the room. Once everyone was settled, he spoke again. Welcome to our school. What was wrong? Why was Mr. Terupt stuttering? I heard some of the visiting kids snickering and laughing at him. Laughing at my teacher. I felt hot. Anger surged through my veins. He doesn't like that they were laughing at Mr. Terupt. Look at him. You don't like that, do you, Oscar? Before I had time to think about it more, Jeffrey exploded and tackled the jokester sitting next to him. One of Jeffrey's forearms was planted under the kid's chin, and his other one landed right across the chest. He flipped the kid right over the back of his chair. This is already not going well. They just got here. Jeffrey jumped on the boy and pinned him to the ground. Luckily, Mr. Terupt got there just in time to grab Jeffrey before he started throwing punches. And believe me, Jeffrey was ready to let that kid have it good. I didn't budge. I was silently rooting for Jeffrey. How dare anyone laugh at my teacher? Jeffrey. First, that kid laughed at Terupt, laughed at my stuttering teacher with his other punk buddies sitting around my table. Then he said, "What is this guy, a retard?" I didn't even think about it. I just reacted. I wanted to hurt him bad. Last chum, remember that I believe it was Peter who used to use that word, which we talked about how bad it is to use that word. That's not an okay word to call somebody. So here you have middle school kids coming to a 6th grade class and being that disrespectful to their teacher who they love. Oh boy. All right, let's read a little bit more. Danielle, class meeting, Mr. Terupt announced. Or maybe I should say ordered. Class meetings had always been favorites of mine. The meetings were a chance for us to share our ideas and concerns, but I wasn't sure about this one. I knew Mr. Terupt would have plenty to say. Who could blame him after what Jeffrey did? Speaking of Jeffrey, he wasn't there for this meeting. He was with Mrs. Williams, probably discussing his attack on that boy, a boy I recognized from the summer. Mr. Terupt had rushed over and pulled Jeffrey off of the boy, who stayed on the ground holding his bloody nose. Then Mr. Terupt led Jeffrey out into the hall and came back in without him in less than a minute. I didn't see Jeffrey for the rest of the day. So again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about this morning, with how Christine had mentioned Mr. Terupt's such an example of a loving dad. You know, he loves and cares for all of these students, but if you mess up and if you're not doing what you're supposed to, he's not going to ignore it. He's going to let you know that what you did was inappropriate, and that's because he cares. So here you have Jeffrey fighting this kid because he picked on Mr. Terupt. Jeffrey did that because he loves Mr. Terupt, but Mr. Terupt didn't just say, he can fight him because he's sticking up for me. No, he still reprimanded him and sent him to the principal. The visiting teacher was next on the scene. Mrs. Stern, ooh, what a name, was her name, and Stern was her game. One look at her and you knew she meant business. She was old and old-fashioned. I got the feeling she'd still rap you on the knuckles with a ruler. She was one of those teachers Grandma understood. Mrs. Stern helped her students sit up, but didn't bother showing him any sympathy. What did you say this time, Derek? Nothing, Derek muttered. He cupped his hand under his nose, but I didn't care if he was hurt. Derek was the jerk from the pool, the one who called me a whale. Oh, bee, or fly. Remember that from the beginning of the book. Danielle went to a public pool and the kid called her a whale, which was that kid that Jeffrey just punched. Everything is connecting. Marty and Wendy took him down to the nurse to get cleaned up. Nurse Barton was good at that, as I would soon find out, and the rest of us continued with the first exchange day. You like this scene? Good listener. Mr. Terupt had told us that the projects would be bigger and better because we had gotten money from the state. He wasn't lying. We had a marine biologist come to Snow Hill School to help us perform squid dissections as part of our ocean unit. Our art room was converted into a science lab. We crowded around the tables. I was so excited. I loved animals, all kinds. She lives on a farm, we know that. I've been thinking about becoming a veterinarian. Once we were all settled, the guest biologist, Squid Man, took charge. Today, you will be looking at a squid. It's very important that you listen and follow directions carefully. We want you to explore, but also learn. Squid Man said a few more things and then passed out the slimy creatures. Definitely not what I was expecting. A room full of squid has a very strong odor. It's the kind of smell that can make people nauseated. It didn't bother me. After being around cow poop all my life, I had become used to strong aromas. Oh my goodness. Teach, I'm not... That was all Lexi managed to say. The next thing out of her mouth was a stream of Barf! Ew, the visitor boy shouted. Did you see that? The girl with the purple sweater just yacked everywhere. They laughed and cheered and thought it was great. I felt bad for Lexi, but I'm pretty sure she smiled when she heard them mention her purple sweater. She ought to take some of that stuffing out of her sweater and clean herself up, Luke whispered. I looked at him, alarmed and embarrassed. I couldn't talk about that sort of thing with a boy. I couldn't talk about that sort of thing with anyone. What? He said. Lexi looks like a pufferfish. Any detective can tell, she added some fake ones. I don't know much about that sort of thing, but I do know they don't grow like that overnight. I laughed. Do you think Lexi knows pufferfish inflate to scare off predators? Not to attract mates, Luke said. I laughed again. Lexi went to Nurse Barton's. The rest of the dissection went smoothly. Mr. Terupt called for the class meeting as soon as guests were gone. We had our chairs arranged in a circle, and Mr. Terupt sat down with our microphone. He didn't say a word. Peter held out his hand, and Mr. Terupt gave him the mic. Jeffrey wouldn't just do that, Peter said. That kid had it coming. I heard them laughing at you, Mr. T, and I'll bet he had something too. Anna went next. I know fighting is wrong, but I think Peter's right. Something happened that made Jeffrey do that. Then Luke took a turn. Mr. Terupt, those boys started snickering and laughing when you stuttered. That's probably when the boy said something. Are you all right? I'm fine, Mr. Terupt was quick to say, taking the microphone. Don't start worrying about me now. When he said that, I thought, ignorance is bliss. Was this another one of those things an adult didn't want us to worry about? Maybe Mr. Terupt wasn't okay. First he stuttered, then after he bent down and grabbed Jeffrey under the arms and pulled him up, Mr. Terupt stumbled again. Jeffrey actually grabbed a hold of Mr. Terupt to keep him from falling. Did he just lose his balance, or was he dizzy? Look, gang, Mr. Terupt said, I'm really proud of the way you're sticking up for Jeffrey. I'm sure he was provoked to do that, but even so, you can't just lash out and attack others. It could cost you big time. You need to learn to handle those situations civilly. You need to always keep control, because to lose it could result in something you didn't intend. Like a snowball, Peter mumbled. Yes, like a snowball, Mr. Terupt said. I think you get my point. Later that day, I arrived home with lots to talk about again. But that was no surprise to Grandma. I filled her in on the fight and the talk we had with Mr. Terupt. We're trying to keep it civil, but I don't know how long that's going to last, she said. What was she talking about? My classroom or something else? The man from our fields? What do you mean? I asked Grandma. Oh, nothing here. Grandma handed me the peeler and a bowl of potatoes. She grabbed a knife and started dicing up the potatoes she had already peeled. It's fine to get two groups of people together, like the state is having your class do with this exchange program, Grandma said. But if the two sides aren't ready to get along, then you're just asking for trouble, you know. You can't force that sort of thing, and if you try to, Grandma looked up from her potatoes and pointed her knife at me. You're going to get violence. She went back to dicing. What could possibly be so hard for people to talk about, I asked. When it gets personal, Grandma said, and then she mumbled something, but I couldn't hear her. What did you say? I asked. I wasn't sure, but I thought she might have said land. Pass me those potatoes you've peeled, Grandma was quick to move past the part of our conversation. Dear God, first, let me say thanks. You sure gave that Derek kid a lesson today. I knew you'd get him for me. I just didn't expect to see it. That was great. Forgive me for saying that. God, I suppose ignorance can be bliss, but not if you aren't ignorant, and I'm not. Suddenly, I've got more to worry about now. Is Mr. Terupt really okay? Is this man from our field thing going to get violent? Does it have something to do with land? Are you helping me find answers or just giving me more questions? I need your help, please. Also, I think you better keep an eye on Lexi. Her so-called wardrobe was a little over the top today. Amen. All right, everyone. We're on page 115 now. Hopefully you are not as bored as Oscar over here. Seems to have fallen asleep on us. But, wow, that was quite a lot of action. for today's reading. So stay tuned for tomorrow's read aloud. Again, we are moving on to page 115 in the perspective of Jeffrey. Look how far we've read. We're moving right along. So we do have, I bought the third book, so we can go right into that, or we can read another book called The Unteachables, which is written by the same author of Restart. So we'll probably take a vote on that. But I think I'm going to want to read the third one. What about you, Oscar? Okay. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, everyone.